Hey everyone, if you keep fish, you already know that maintaining a healthy tank is basically an endless balancing act. Today, we're diving into this explainer to look at a super fascinating entry from Ang's Notes on Fishkeeping. We're going to tackle a really frustrating yet incredibly common aquarium issue that pops up the second that delicate balance goes even slightly sideways. Let's get right into the surface scum solution and how to manage biofilm.
So picture your own aquarium for a second. You walk up for your routine daily feeding. You know the drill. The water is perfectly clear, the fish are active, everything seems totally fine. But then, you glance down at the top of the water, and you see it. What is that strange, unnatural, oily film stubbornly clinging to the surface? Ang actually just ran into this exact same scenario during a standard feeding routine. So, what exactly are we dealing with here?
Well, what Ang is dealing with is biofilm, or as it's commonly called, surface scum. It's this highly visible, oily layer of buildup that just loves to accumulate whenever the surface of your aquarium water gets a little too still. Now, aside from immediately ruining the aesthetic of your beautiful tank, it's a huge red flag that something is fundamentally off with the water chemistry. And let's be honest, it's one of those things that once you spot it, you literally just can't unsee it.
I absolutely love how vividly Ang describes this in the notes. They wrote that it looks like a thin sheet of fractured ice or crinkled, oily paper. That's just a brilliant analogy, right? It really helps us visualize the gross reality of surface scum. It doesn't move like normal water. It has this weird, rigid, almost plastic-like texture that literally crinkles when you disturb it. Honestly, if you've ever seen a puddle in a parking lot with that rainbow sheen of motor oil floating on top, yeah, you have a pretty good idea of what this looks like sitting inside an otherwise pristine fish tank.
Okay, so diagnosing the culprits. Where is this oily mess actually coming from? Because it doesn't just magically appear out of nowhere. In the fish keeping hobby, every single visible symptom is a clue, pointing to a hidden imbalance. So Egg stepped back to play detective, observing the environment to pinpoint the exact variables that had recently changed.
So what did the audit reveal? Well, Ang found 3 specific culprits teaming up to cause the issue. First off, the surface water was just way too still. Without enough agitation, oils are allowed to pool and basically solidify right at the top. Second, they had recently switched back to a regular brand of high-protein fish pellets. And third, there were some decaying aquatic plants hanging around in the tank. What's really fascinating here is how these multiple small elements, the water flow, the new diet, and some old plant matter, all combine to create one massive, highly visible problem. It's almost never just one single thing going wrong, is it? But the real catalyst? That comes down to the diet. We really need to look at the previous feeding routine versus this recent switch to high-protein pellets. See, high protein often equals a much higher oil content. So with every single feeding, a bunch of excess oil was being dropped directly onto the surface. And because oil is lighter than water, it naturally floats. Combine that with water that was way too still, boom, it just sat there, building up into a thick layer day after day.
Now, there was another totally human factor at play here, a completely relatable oops moment. Ang actually admits to accidentally overfeeding the fish lately, and the reason why is pretty funny. The new high-protein pellets were a completely different size than the old ones, so they had a tendency to just tumble out of the container way too fast. We've all been there, right? You mean to drop in a tiny pinch, but suddenly a whole cluster of pellets dumps into the tank. You might think, whatever, the fish will eat it, but all that extra food means a massive surplus of excess oil hitting the water all at once.
And just to show you how this problem compounds, we've got a hidden contributor: decaying plants. If we shift our focus from the surface down to the substrate, specifically checking out the bottom left of the tank, Ang noticed these decaying aquatic plants. So think about what's happening. While the fish food is dropping all this oil from the top, the decaying plant matter is quietly breaking down at the very bottom. It's releasing organic waste that slowly makes its way up to the surface, adding even more biological buildup to the scum. It is literally a two-front war on the water's surface tension. All right, so how do we fix it? Let's talk simple solutions in prevention. Look, when your tank starts looking like it's covered in fractured ice, it is so easy to panic and assume you need some harsh chemical clarifier or a massive water change. But the fix is actually surprisingly simple and entirely mechanical. Ang lays out a resolution that doesn't require any expensive additives or tearing your whole setup apart. It really just boils down to simple physical removal and tweaking a few daily habits.
Here's the exact, incredibly accessible cleanup method Ang used. Step 1. Literally just take a totally dry paper towel, lay it completely flat on the surface of the water for just a second and pull it straight up. It acts like a magnet and will actually soak the oily biofilm right off. You can also use a fine mesh fish net to literally just scoop the crinkled layer away. I mean, it is really that easy. And then step 2 is prevention. You just have to carefully control those feeding portions. No more letting the pellets aggressively tumble out of the cup. By managing what you put in, you completely manage the excess oil. The absolute crucial takeaway from this whole explainer is that micro changes completely impact macro environments. Understanding and controlling tiny inputs prevents much larger headaches down the line. Remember, an aquarium is a closed loop. Think about the wild cascade of events that happened here. A pellet is slightly smaller than expected, so it falls out of the cup a little too fast. It hits still water. It releases oil, and suddenly your entire ecosystem looks like an oil spill. Controlling the micro, like exactly how you hold the food container, or making sure you properly agitate the water, is exactly how you preserve the macro environment for your fish.
Ang's notes are such a great reminder that simple observation is hands down the greatest tool we have in this hobby. Just by paying a little closer attention during a routine feeding, a really complex problem was identified, diagnosed, and resolved with a paper towel. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a few extra pellets of fish food tumbling out of a little plastic cup can completely alter the surface of a whole ecosystem, what other delicate, invisible balances are quietly at work, just waiting to be discovered the next time you look a little closer at the water?